I am Jason, 25, living in Chicago with a great job in finance and my own apartment. Life looks perfect now, but 3 years ago I discovered my $65,000 college fund had been emptied for my stepbrother Brendan. That betrayal by my own mother changed everything. I walked away from my family, completely built my life from scratch. Now my stepdad has abandoned them. Brendan is in jail, and Mom wants me back in her life. Before I dive into how my own mother betrayed me and what happened 3 years later, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away from toxic family. I grew up in a small house in suburban Portland with my mom Rachel. My dad died when I was 8 years old after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. His death devastated both of us, but especially my mom. She was only 32 when she became a widow, and suddenly had to figure out how to raise me alone while working full-time as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company. Despite our limited finances, Mom always made sure I had everything I needed. We were incredibly close those first few years after Dad died. Every night she would sit at the edge of my bed and promise me that no matter what, she would make sure I had opportunities in life. She had this ritual where she would hold my face in her hands and say, "Jason, you are going to do amazing things. I will make sure of it." One of the most important promises she made was about my education. When I was about 10, she sat me down at our kitchen table and explained that she was starting a special savings account. "This is your college fund," she told me. "Every month I am putting money in here so that when you are ready for college you will not have to worry about how to pay for it." I remember watching her every month as she would carefully calculate our budget and always without fail transfer money into that account. Sometimes it was only $50, sometimes a bit more when she got her tax return, or a small bonus at work. She would show me the growing balance and say, "See, this is your future we are building." School became my refuge and focus. I threw myself into my studies partly because I loved learning and partly because I knew how hard my mom was working to secure my future. By middle school, I was consistently at the top of my class. I joined the science club and discovered my passion for biology and chemistry. I started dreaming about becoming a doctor, maybe even a surgeon like the one who had tried to save my dad. When I was 14, our family dynamic shifted dramatically. Mom met Mark at a company event. He was a sales manager who had recently transferred to her office. Within 6 months, they were married, and our quiet little household expanded. Mark moved into our house, bringing along his 16-year-old son, Brendan. The initial adjustment was awkward but not terrible. Mark was polite enough to me, though never particularly warm. He seemed to make my mother happy, and that was enough for me at first. She smiled, laughed more, and seemed less weighed down by the responsibilities of single parenthood. I was genuinely happy that she had found someone to share her life with. Brendan, on the other hand, was more challenging from the start. 2 years older than me, he made it clear that he considered himself superior in every way. While I was studious and somewhat reserved, Brendan was loud, athletic, and popular. He played football and never missed an opportunity to point out how my interest in science was nerdy and lame. There were early warning signs about both Mark and Brendan that I chose to ignore. Mark would often make comments about how I needed to toughen up or be more of a man. He seemed disappointed that I preferred reading to watching football with him and Brendan. More concerning was how he controlled the family finances almost immediately after moving in. Mom stopped managing the household budget and instead deferred to Mark on all financial decisions. At the time, I thought she was just relieved to share the burden. Brendan showed troubling behavior within months of moving in. I found alcohol hidden in his room once while looking for a calculator he had borrowed. When I mentioned it to Mom, she seemed concerned but ultimately accepted Mark's dismissal that it was just normal teenage experimentation. Later, when Brendan came home clearly drunk one night, Mark laughed it off as boys being boys. I noticed my mom's uncomfortable expression, but she said nothing. Despite these changes at home, I maintained my focus on school. I joined more advanced science classes, participated in regional competitions, and started volunteering at the local hospital to gain experience for my future medical career. My teachers often told my mom that I had real potential, and she would beam with pride. Those moments reinforced our bond despite the new family dynamics. During my sophomore year, I overheard an argument between Mom and Mark about my college fund. Mom was insisting that the money was strictly for my education, while Mark suggested that as a family fund it should be available for both Brendan and me. The argument ended with Mom firmly stating that the fund was non-negotiable. I felt reassured by her stance and continued to believe that my future was secure. Throughout high school, I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. I took every advanced placement course available and scored in the top percentiles on my SATs. By senior year, I was applying to top universities with pre-med programs. The guidance counselor told me I had a strong chance at scholarships, but probably not full rides given the competitive nature of these schools. I was not concerned because I knew I had the college fund my mother had been building since I was 10. My high school graduation was a proud day. As valedictorian, I gave a speech about perseverance and gratitude, making special mention of my mother's sacrifices to get me there. I saw tears in her eyes as I spoke, and for a moment everything felt right. Mark and Brendan sat stiffly in the audience, offering only perfunctory congratulations afterward, but I hardly noticed. What mattered was that I had been accepted to Jefferson University, one of the top schools on my list, with a partial scholarship. The remaining tuition and expenses would be covered by the college fund that had grown to approximately $65,000 over the years. That summer before college was filled with anticipation. I worked at the local pharmacy, started shopping for dorm essentials, and frequently discussed my upcoming courses with my mom. She seemed distracted at times, but I attributed it to the natural anxiety of sending her only child off to college. I had no idea that a devastating betrayal was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and my future. August arrived with a flurry of college preparation activities. With only 3 weeks before I was scheduled to move into my dorm at Jefferson University, I sat down at our kitchen table to finalize my financial arrangements. Mom was at work and Mark and Brendan had gone to a baseball game, so I had the house to myself. I logged into the college portal to confirm my scholarship details and calculate exactly how much I would need to withdraw from the college fund to cover the remaining tuition, room and board and books for the first semester. I called the bank to discuss the transfer process, expecting a straightforward conversation. Instead, the representative's words sent a chill down my spine. "I am showing a current balance of $8,322 in that account, Mr. Wright." "There must be a mistake," I insisted, my throat tightening. "That account should have over $65,000 in it." After verifying my identity again, the representative confirmed there was no error. According to their records, there had been several large withdrawals over the past year, with the most recent one of $20,000 just 2 months ago. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. I immediately pulled up the online banking records and stared in horror at the transaction history. 5 separate withdrawals, starting small at $5,000 and culminating in the $20,000 withdrawal in June. Each withdrawal had been authorized by my mother. I sat frozen at the kitchen table until I heard the front door open. Mom walked in, setting down her purse and offering me a tired smile that quickly faded when she saw my face. "What is wrong?" she asked, approaching cautiously. "The college fund," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is gone, almost all of it." Her face crumpled, and in that moment I knew. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. She knew exactly what had happened to my money. "Jason, I can explain." She began, sitting down across from me. "There have been some financial issues. Brendan got into some trouble and we needed the money for his legal fees and rehabilitation program." The room seemed to spin around me. "My college fund. You took my college fund for Brendan." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "It was a family emergency, Jason. Brendan was in real trouble. He got a DUI last year, and then there were drug possession charges and property damage. If we did not get him proper legal representation and treatment, he could have gone to jail. So you sacrificed my future for his mistakes?" I asked, my voice rising. "I am supposed to start college in 3 weeks, Mom. How am I supposed to pay for it now?" "You can get student loans," she said, her voice small. "You have your scholarship, and Mark and I will help as much as we can once Brendan is back on his feet." "Back on his feet," I repeated incredulously. "What about me? I have worked my entire life for this. You promised me that money was for my education. You showed me the statements every month. You made me believe I could count on it. The front door opened again, and Mark and Brendan walked in laughing about something until they noticed the tension in the kitchen. Mark's expression immediately hardened. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "He knows about the college fund," Mom said quietly. Mark crossed his arms. "So it was a family decision." "No, it was not," I shot back, standing up. "I was never consulted. That money was specifically saved for my education long before you were even in the picture." "Listen, kid," Mark said dismissively. "Real men pay their own way. Brendan needed that money for his treatment. It was life or death." I turned to look at Brendan, who stood leaning against the wall with no trace of remorse on his face. If anything, he looked annoyed by the confrontation. "What exactly happened?" I asked him directly. "What was so important that it cost me my entire future?" Brendan shrugged. "Had some problems. Got caught with some stuff. Wrecked my car. Needed a lawyer and rehab. Not like you need the money anyway. You are smart enough to get scholarships." The casual way he dismissed the impact on my life was stunning. I turned back to my mother, searching for any sign that she understood the magnitude of her betrayal. "How could you do this to me? After everything you promised?" "Brendan needed it more," she whispered. "He could have ended up in jail without help. And now I might not be able to go to college at all," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "Do you understand what you have done? Jefferson costs $40,000 a year. My scholarship only covers $15,000. I was counting on that money, Mom. You knew that." "Do not be so dramatic," Mark interjected. "Take out loans like normal people, or go to community college for a while. It is not the end of the world." But it felt like the end of my world. In a single afternoon, my carefully planned future had been demolished. The person I trusted most had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I spent the next week in a desperate scramble to salvage my college plans. I called Jefferson's financial aid office, explaining my situation and begging for additional assistance. They were sympathetic but limited in what they could offer last minute. I applied for emergency loans, but with no credit history and no cosigner willing to help, the options were few and expensive. The worst part was watching Brendan continue his life as if nothing had happened. He showed no signs of having benefited from the rehabilitation that had supposedly been so urgent. I caught him drinking in the backyard with friends just days after our confrontation. When I mentioned it to Mom, she sighed and said, "He is trying, Jason. Recovery is not linear." I tried to understand my mother's perspective. I really did. I knew she cared about Brendan as her stepson and wanted to help him. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she had made a choice between his needs and mine, and she had chosen him despite the fact that his problems were self-inflicted while I had done everything right. One evening I overheard Mark and Mom arguing in their bedroom. "He will get over it," Mark said firmly. "Jason is just being entitled. Brendan could have gone to jail without our help." "We should have found another way," my mother replied, her voice thick with tears. "Jason worked so hard. He was counting on that money." "Your son needs to toughen up," Mark said dismissively. "The real world does not hand you everything on a silver platter. Besides, we are a family now. That means sharing resources where they are needed most." It became crystal clear to me then that in this new family equation, my needs would always come second to Brendan's toothing. The college fund betrayal was not a one-time emergency decision. It was a reflection of my new place in the family hierarchy. With less than 2 weeks before the start of the semester, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called Jefferson University and deferred my acceptance for a year. Then I began making plans to move out and find a way to fund my education on my own terms. The betrayal had cut too deep, and I knew I could no longer rely on the people who should have been my strongest supporters. The morning after deferring my acceptance to Jefferson, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt since discovering the empty college fund. I would not spend another year living under the same roof as the people who had betrayed me. I called my best friend Luke and asked if I could crash at his place for a few days while I figured out my next steps. His parents had always been kind to me, and they agreed without hesitation. I packed 2 suitcases with my essential belongings, while Mom was at work and Mark and Brendan were out. I left a note on my bed explaining that I needed space and would be staying with friends. As I walked out the front door of the only home I had ever known, I felt both terrified and strangely liberated. That evening, my phone exploded with calls and texts from my mother. I answered only to tell her I was safe but needed time away from the family. She cried and begged me to come home so we could work things out as a family, but there was no solution she could offer that would restore my trust or my college fund. "I cannot be around you right now, Mom," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. "You chose Brendan over me. You took my future and gave it to him. I need to figure out how to move forward on my own." Within a week, I had secured a job as a pharmacy technician at a 24-hour drugstore, working overnight shifts that paid slightly better than daytime hours. I also found a position at a local coffee shop for mornings. Between the two jobs, I was working nearly 60 hours a week, but it gave me enough income to rent a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. I enrolled in Portland Community College, taking a full course load of prerequisites that would transfer to a 4-year university. My plan was simple but grueling: work as much as possible, save every penny, excel in my classes, and reapply to universities with a stronger financial position in 2 years. My mother continued reaching out, but our conversations became increasingly strained and brief. She would minimize what had happened, saying things like, "I know you are upset about the money, but family is more important than money." Each time she downplayed the betrayal, the distance between us grew. Mark's attitude toward my departure was predictably dismissive. Running away when things get tough is not what men do. He told me during one of the few times I answered his call, "Your mother is heartbroken, and you are just being selfish." "Selfish?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole my college fund for your son, and you have the nerve to call me selfish." "We did not steal anything," he snapped back. "That money was used for a family emergency. You are just too immature to understand that sometimes sacrifices have to be made." "Funny how the sacrifices always seem to be mine," I replied before hanging up. The irony was not lost on me that, while I was working 2 jobs and attending college full-time, Brendan continued to spiral. Through occasional updates from my mother, I learned that despite the extensive rehab program my college fund had supposedly paid for, Brendan had been arrested again for driving with a suspended license and possession of illegal substances. Each time, Mark and my mother rallied to his defense, hiring lawyers and paying fines. The first few months of independence were brutally difficult. I would work at the coffee shop from 6 a.m. to noon, attend classes from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., sleep for a few hours, then work at the pharmacy from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. There were days when I could barely keep my eyes open during lectures. My tiny apartment was sparsely furnished with second-hand items, and I survived on ramen noodles and whatever food I could bring home from the coffee shop. Yet, despite the hardship, I thrived academically. The community college professors were impressed by my dedication, and one of my science instructors, Dr. Rodriguez, took a particular interest in my situation. She helped me apply for additional scholarships and introduced me to research opportunities that would strengthen my eventual transfer applications. "You have a fire in you that many students lack," she told me after I aced her organic chemistry final. "What happened to you was unfair, but you are turning it into fuel. That will take you far." Holidays were the hardest. That first Thanksgiving, I worked a double shift at the pharmacy rather than face invitations from either my family or friends who would be with their families. Christmas brought a tearful visit from my mother, who came to my apartment bearing gifts and pleas for reconciliation. "Please come home for Christmas dinner," she begged. "It is not the same without you." "Home?" I questioned. "That house stopped feeling like home the moment you decided my education was less important than Brendan's legal problems." "I made a mistake, Jason," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I should have found another way. But I was scared for Brendan, and Mark was so insistent. You were my only parent." I told her, not bothering to hide my pain. "You were supposed to protect my interests, not sacrifice them for your new family." She left with her gift still in hand, and I spent Christmas alone in my apartment, studying for the spring semester and picking up extra shifts. By the end of my first year at community college, I had saved nearly $10,000 and maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. I had also learned valuable lessons about self-reliance and resilience. I stopped answering most calls from my mother and only responded to texts with brief updates about my academic progress. I never asked how Brendan was doing, and eventually she stopped offering information. During my second year at community college, I secured an internship at a local research laboratory that related to my pre-med studies. The position came with a modest stipend that allowed me to reduce my hours at the coffee shop. I was still exhausted most of the time, but I could see my path forward taking shape. I applied to transfer to several state universities with strong pre-med programs. My perfect community college transcript, compelling personal statement about overcoming adversity, and glowing recommendations from professors earned me acceptance to Washington State University with a substantial transfer scholarship. It was not Jefferson, but it was a respected school with the programs I needed, and my scholarship would cover nearly 70% of the costs. 2 years after the betrayal, I packed up my small apartment and prepared to move to Washington. I had saved enough for the remaining tuition and a small apartment near campus. I would still need to work part-time, but for the first time in 2 years I could focus primarily on my education rather than survival. The night before I left Portland, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and mouth. "I heard from Dr. Rodriguez that you are leaving for Washington tomorrow," she said. "I could not let you go without saying goodbye." I invited her in, reluctantly watching as she took in the sparse surroundings that had been my home for 2 years. "I am proud of you," she said softly. "What you have accomplished on your own is remarkable." "I should not have had to do it on my own," I replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "That was never the plan." "I know," she whispered, "and I will regret that decision for the rest of my life." We talked for an hour, the most substantial conversation we had had in 2 years. She told me that Brendan had dropped out of the local college where he had briefly enrolled after his legal troubles. Mark was increasingly controlling of their finances, and their marriage was strained. I listened, but offered no advice or sympathy. When she left, she hugged me tightly, and I allowed it, though I did not fully return the embrace. As I drove to Washington the next day, I felt as though I was truly closing a chapter of my life. The betrayal would always be part of my story, but it would not define my future. I had proven to myself and to everyone else that I could succeed on my own terms. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in 2 years, I felt genuinely hopeful about what lay ahead. Washington State University offered me more than just academic opportunities. It provided a fresh start in a place where no one knew about my family drama or the betrayal that had altered my life path. For the first time in years, I could introduce myself as just Jason, a transfer student with a passion for medicine, rather than the kid whose mom stole his college fund. I moved into a small but decent apartment, about a mile from campus, with a roommate named Tyler, who was also a transfer student. Tyler was studying computer science and worked part-time in the university IT department. We clicked, immediately bonding over late-night study sessions and our shared experiences of having to work harder than most of our classmates to afford our education. "So what brought you to WSU?" Tyler asked during our first week as roommates. I hesitated, then decided on a simplified version of the truth. Financial issues forced me to start at community college. I worked for 2 years to save up enough to transfer here. Tyler nodded, appreciatively. "Respect, man. Most people would have just taken out massive loans or given up. Takes grit to do what you did." That simple acknowledgement of my struggle meant more than Tyler could know. In my previous life, surrounded by Mark's dismissive attitude and Brendan's entitlement, my hard work had been treated as expected rather than exceptional. Here it was valued. I maintained my rigorous academic schedule, but with my improved financial situation, thanks to scholarships and savings, I only needed to work 20 hours a week at a campus research lab, instead of the 60-plus hours I had been working in Portland. This gave me time to join the Pre-Med Society and volunteer at the University Medical Center, both crucial experiences for medical school applications. For the first time since the betrayal, I also had time for friendships. Besides Tyler, I grew close to several classmates in my advanced biology courses. We formed a study group that met twice weekly, pushing each other to excel and celebrating our achievements together. These people knew nothing about my past and accepted me for who I was now. The relief of that fresh start was immeasurable. Occasionally, I would receive texts from my mother. I responded politely but briefly, never sharing details about my new life or asking about hers. She sent a care package once with homemade cookies and a card telling me how proud she was of me. I thanked her but did not reciprocate by sending anything back. The wall I had built remained firmly in place. About 6 months into my time at WSU, I received a surprising call from my Aunt Lena, my mother's sister who lived in Seattle. We had never been particularly close, but she had always been kind to me at family gatherings. "Jason, how are you doing? I have been thinking about you," she said when I answered. We caught up briefly on my studies before she carefully broached the real reason for her call. "I saw your mom last weekend," she said. "She told me a bit about what happened with your college fund." I tensed immediately. "Did she send you to plead her case?" "No, not at all," Aunt Lena assured me. "Actually, I told her I thought what she did was wrong. Family loyalty is important, but what happened to you was not fair." The validation from a family member was unexpected and oddly emotional for me. "Thank you for saying that I managed. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you overreacted," she continued. "And I wanted to check if you need anything. I know you are making it on your own, but everyone can use support sometimes." Though I did not need financial help at that point, Aunt Lena's offer opened the door to a relationship I had not realized I needed. We began talking regularly, and she became my one connection to family that did not come with painful baggage. Through Aunt Lena, I occasionally heard updates about my mother and her household. Brendan had apparently dropped out of the local community college, despite having been given the financial support that should have been mine. He was working sporadically at various retail jobs, but never keeping them for long. According to Lena, my mother seemed increasingly unhappy, though she rarely complained directly about her marriage or stepson. Meanwhile, my own life continued to improve. At the end of my first year at WSU, I was offered a position as a teaching assistant for an introductory biology course, which came with a stipend that further eased my financial situation. My professors recognized my potential and began mentoring me more closely, offering research opportunities that would strengthen my eventual medical school applications. I also started dating a nursing student named Sarah, my first serious relationship since the family betrayal. Building trust did not come easily to me anymore, but Sarah was patient and understanding as I gradually opened up about my past. "You went through something really traumatic," she said one night after I had finally shared the full story. "Not just the loss of the money, but the breach of trust from the person who was supposed to protect you. It makes sense that you have walls up." Her insight helped me recognize that my issues with trust extended beyond just my relationship with my mother. I had become guarded in all my relationships, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. With Sarah's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist through the University Counseling Center. Dr. Winters. My therapist helped me process the anger and hurt I had been carrying. "What happened to you was a significant betrayal," she acknowledged in one of our early sessions. "You have every right to your feelings about it. But carrying this much anger also takes a toll on you." Through weekly sessions, I began to understand that while I could not control what had happened, I could control how much power I gave it over my present and future. I learned to set boundaries without building impenetrable walls, to trust cautiously rather than not at all. By the time my graduation from WSU approached, I had transformed in ways that went far beyond academics. I had a 3.95 GPA, strong medical school prospects, a healthy relationship, genuine friendships, and a much better understanding of myself. I had created a chosen family of people who supported and valued me. The week before graduation, I received an email from my mother asking if she could attend the ceremony. It was the first time in nearly 3 years that she had suggested seeing me in person. I discussed it at length with Dr. Winters before responding. "What do you want?" Dr. Winters asked me. "Not what you think you should want or what would make your mother happy, but what would be best for you." After careful consideration, I decided I was not ready for that step. I replied to my mother with a kind but firm message, explaining that I preferred to celebrate this achievement with my friends and mentors who had been part of my journey at WSU. I did not mention that Aunt Lena would be attending as my family representative. The day of graduation was sunny and perfect. As I sat among my fellow graduates listening to the commencement speech, I reflected on how different my path had been from what I had planned. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my dreams had instead forced me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. When they called my name and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, the cheers from Tyler, Sarah, and my other friends were all the validation I needed. After the ceremony, Aunt Lena hugged me tightly. "Your parents would be so proud," she said, referring to my father who had passed and the mother I had once known. "I know I am." That evening, as we celebrated at a local restaurant, I received a text from my mother. "Congratulations, Jason. I know how hard you worked for this. I love you." For the first time in years, I responded with more than just a polite acknowledgement. "Thank you. That means a lot." It was a small step, but a significant one. As I looked around at the people who had chosen to be part of my life, and whom I had chosen in return, I realized that family could be defined in many ways. The painful lessons of the past had led me to create something valuable and genuine. I had not just survived the betrayal. In many ways, I had thrived because of it. The news came on a rainy Tuesday in October, nearly 6 months after my graduation from WSU. I had secured a position as a research assistant at a prestigious medical research facility in Seattle, a job that would strengthen my medical school applications while providing a stable income. I was sharing an apartment with Tyler, who had also found work in the area, and things with Sarah were serious enough that we were discussing moving in together the following year. I was in the lab running tests when my phone vibrated with a call from Aunt Lena. This was unusual. We typically scheduled our calls in advance due to our busy schedules. "Jason, do you have a minute?" Her voice sounded strained. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I stepped away from my workstation into the hallway. "It is about your mother," she said hesitantly. "There has been a situation. Mark left her about a month ago. Apparently he cleaned out their joint accounts before disappearing. The news landed like a physical blow. Despite everything, I had never wished this kind of hardship on my mother. Left. As in divorce, I asked, trying to process the information. No formal divorce yet, but yes, he is gone. Rachel only told me yesterday. She has been trying to handle it on her own, but things are bad, Jason. Really bad. Aunt Lena explained that Mark had been making increasingly risky investments over the past year, losing substantial amounts of money. When his business partners began asking difficult questions about missing funds, he had withdrawn everything from the joint accounts he shared with my mother and disappeared. The house was facing foreclosure, and my mother was overwhelmed with debt she had not even known existed. "What about Brendan?" I asked, surprised by my own concern for my stepbrother. Lena's voice grew even more somber. "That is the other part of this mess. Brendan is in jail. He was arrested 3 months ago for fraud and drug distribution. From what Rachel told me, he has been involved in some serious criminal activities for quite a while." I leaned against the wall, stunned by how completely the family unit that had once betrayed me had fallen apart. "Has she tried to contact me about this?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Lena confirmed. "She specifically asked me not to tell you. She says you have been through enough because of her mistakes. But Jason, she is not well. Beyond the financial problems, her health is suffering. The stress has triggered some serious issues with her blood pressure and heart." "What is she doing for money?" "For housing." Despite 3 years of distance, these basic concerns for my mother surfaced immediately. "She is working extra shifts at her job, but it is not enough. She is about to be evicted from the apartment she moved to after they had to sell the house. She is too proud to ask for help, but she needs it." After ending the call with Aunt Lena, I returned to my work in a daze. My carefully constructed new life suddenly felt intersected by the past I had worked so hard to leave behind. That evening, I discussed the situation with Tyler and Sarah over dinner. "You do not owe her anything," Tyler pointed out immediately. "She made her choice when she gave away your college fund." Sarah was more measured. "That is true, but this is also different. She is in crisis, and it sounds like she is not even asking for your help. You need to figure out what you can live with, regardless of what she deserves." Later that night, as I lay awake contemplating the situation, my phone pinged with an email notification. The sender was my mother with the subject line, "I am sorry to reach out." It was the first direct communication she had initiated in almost a year. The email was brief and dignified, despite the desperation I could sense behind the words. "Dear Jason, I apologize for contacting you this way. I promised myself I would respect your boundaries and not burden you with my problems. However, my situation has become dire, and I have nowhere else to turn. I want to be clear that I am not asking for money. After what I did to you, I would never presume to ask for financial help. What I need is advice. You have always been smarter and more resourceful than anyone I know. My health is declining, and I am facing eviction next month. If you could spare a few minutes to talk, I would be deeply grateful. I understand if you say no. You have built a wonderful life for yourself despite my terrible mistake, and you have every right to keep your distance. With love always, Mom." The email stirred a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication in seeing the consequences of her choices unfold, but also a surprising surge of protectiveness for the woman who had raised me alone after my father died. I remembered the years of sacrifice before Mark and Brendan entered our lives, how she had worked extra hours and skipped meals to ensure I had what I needed. The next day, I scheduled a session with Dr. Winters to help sort through my conflicted feelings. "It sounds like you are torn between the hurt from the past and your natural compassion," she observed after I explained the situation. "Both reactions are valid." "Part of me thinks this is karma," I admitted. "She chose Mark and Brendan over me, and look how that turned out. But another part remembers the mom who raised me, who loved me unconditionally before they came along." "What would helping her cost you, Doctor?" Winters asked. "Not just financially, but emotionally." It was the right question. I had worked hard to build boundaries and protect myself from further hurt. Re-engaging with my mother meant risking more pain. Yet, completely turning my back on her in this moment of crisis did not feel like something I could live with either. "I think I need to at least talk to her," I finally decided. "Set clear boundaries, but hear her out." After discussing it further with Sarah and Aunt Lena, I replied to my mother's email with a suggestion to meet at a coffee shop halfway between Seattle and Portland that weekend. The neutral location was intentional. I was not ready to invite her into my home, or to step back into any space that belonged to her. In the days leading up to our meeting, memories from my childhood flooded back. I remembered my mother teaching me to ride a bike, staying up all night, when I had the flu, helping me with science fair projects. I also remembered her face when she admitted to giving away my college fund the way she had chosen to protect Brendan at my expense. Both versions of my mother were real, and I struggled to reconcile them. As I drove to the meeting point that Saturday, I reminded myself of the boundaries I had decided to maintain. I would listen, offer advice if I could, but keep emotional distance. This was not a reconciliation. It was a response to a crisis, nothing more. When I arrived at the coffee shop, I almost did not recognize the woman sitting alone by the window. My mother had aged what looked like 10 years in the 3 since I had last seen her. Her once vibrant brown hair was now streaked with gray, her face lined with stress and exhaustion. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose, and her hands trembled slightly as she raised her cup to her lips. Seeing her physical decline hit me harder than I had anticipated. Whatever anger I still harbored, this was still the woman who had once been my entire world. I took a deep breath and walked to her table, ready to face whatever came next in this complicated family story. "Jason." My mother's voice quavered as she stood to greet me. She hesitated clearly, unsure whether to attempt a hug. I made the decision for her by extending my hand for a handshake instead. The formality clearly pained her, but she accepted it with a nod. "Thank you for coming," she said as we both sat down. "I did not expect you to." I studied her more closely across the table. The physical changes were even more apparent up close. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her complexion had a grayish undertone that concerned me as a medical professional in training. "Aunt Lena said you are having health issues," I said, starting with the most immediate concern rather than the emotional minefield between us. She waved a dismissive hand. "High blood pressure, heart palpitations. The doctor says it is stress-related, nothing to worry about." Those are serious symptoms, I countered. Are you on medication? I have prescriptions, she admitted. But with everything else, sometimes the copays are difficult. The idea that my mother was choosing between medication and other necessities was disturbing. Whatever had happened between us, I did not want her health to suffer. Tell me what happened with Mark, I said, shifting to the central issue. The full story. She took a deep breath and began speaking in a measured tone as if she had rehearsed this explanation. Looking back, there were warning signs from the beginning. Mark always insisted on controlling our finances. He called it taking care of things, but really, he was hiding problems. About a year ago, I discovered he had taken out a second mortgage on the house without telling me. When I confronted him, he claimed it was for investments that would make us wealthy. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee, with slightly trembling hands. Then there were calls from creditors I knew nothing about. Bills for credit cards I never used. When I pressed him, he would get angry, accuse me of not trusting him. Eventually, I learned he had gambling problems and failed business ventures. By then, we were drowning in debt. And he just left, I asked, still struggling to comprehend the abandonment. His business partners were threatening legal action. Something about misappropriated funds. One morning I woke up and he was gone. So was every dollar in our accounts. He left a note saying he was sorry and would make it up to me someday. A bitter laugh escaped her. The bank foreclosed on the house. I had to sell most of our possessions to afford a small apartment. I processed this information feeling a complicated mix of emotions. What about Brendan? Aunt Lena mentioned he is in jail. At this, my mother's composure finally cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. Brendan has been in trouble for years, much worse than I ever told you. The rehabilitation program we sent him to. He left after 2 weeks. The legal issues continued. Drugs mostly, but then fraud. He was stealing identities, credit card numbers. He claims Mark taught him how. She wiped her eyes. He is serving a 3-year sentence. So the money from my college fund, it did not even help him, I stated flatly. No, she whispered. It did not. Nothing helped him because he did not want help, and I destroyed your trust for nothing. The raw honesty of this admission hung between us. For 3 years I had imagined confronting my mother about the betrayal, demanding explanations and apologies. Now that the moment had arrived, I found myself wanting to understand more than to accuse. Why did you do it, Mom? Really, was Mark that persuasive? She closed her eyes briefly, then met my gaze directly. I could blame Mark. He was manipulative and controlling. But the truth is, I made the choice. I convinced myself that you would be fine because you were always so capable. Brendan was troubled, and I thought if we just gave him enough support, he would turn things around. She reached for a napkin to dab at her eyes. Mark made me feel like I was failing as a mother to Brendan if I did not help him. He would say things like, a real mother would do anything for her child. And somehow I let that override my duty to you. Her voice broke. It was the worst mistake of my life, Jason. I betrayed the one person who never gave me any reason to doubt or worry. The naked truth of her admission was both painful and strangely healing. For years I had wondered if she understood the magnitude of what she had done. Now I knew she did. Brendan told me right before he was sentenced that he had pressured Mark to ask me for the money. She continued. He knew about your college fund. He said he thought it was unfair that you had money saved and he did not. He admitted he never really needed rehab. He wanted the money for a car and to pay off drug debts. My jaw tightened at this revelation. The betrayal was even worse than I had understood. Not only had my college fund been taken, but it had been squandered rather than used for the emergency it was claimed to be. Do you have any contact with Brendan now? I asked. He calls sometimes asking for money on his commissary account. I send what I can, which is not much. She looked down at her hands. Old habits die hard, I guess. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. I appreciate your honesty today. I have spent 3 years wondering if you ever truly understood what you did to me. I understand, she said quietly. I destroyed your trust. I forced you to struggle when I had promised to support you. There is no excuse for what I did. No, there is not, I agreed. but I did not come here today to make you feel worse. You said you needed advice about your situation. She straightened slightly. Yes, I am facing eviction next month. My salary covers basic expenses, but not the back rent I owe. The medical bills are piling up. I have nowhere to go, Jason. Lena would take me in, but her place is too small and her husband is not comfortable with the idea. What about legal recourse against Mark? He cleaned out joint accounts. That has to be illegal. The lawyer I spoke to said I could pursue it, but finding Mark would be the first challenge, and legal fees. She shrugged helplessly. I considered the situation carefully. What would genuine amends look like to you, Mom? If you could make things right, what would that mean? The question seemed to surprise her. I cannot make it right. The money is gone. Your trust is gone. All I can do is apologize and try to rebuild whatever relationship you are willing to have with me. That is not what I asked, I pressed. If you could make amends, what would you do? She thought for a moment. I would repay every cent of your college fund. I would respect whatever boundaries you set. I would prove through actions, not just words, that I have learned from my mistakes. She looked up at me. And I would never expect forgiveness. I would simply try to earn back a place in your life, however small. Her answer told me what I needed to know. She understood the depth of her betrayal and did not expect an easy resolution. This was not a manipulative plea for help, but a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a desire to do better. I need to be very clear about something, I said firmly. I am willing to help you with your immediate crisis. I can assist with finding housing and getting your health stabilized. But this does not mean everything is fixed between us. Trust takes years to build and seconds to break. Rebuilding it, if that is even possible, will take time. I understand, she said quickly. I do not expect anything from you, Jason. The fact that you are even sitting here talking to me is more than I deserve. And I need to be clear about Brendan, I continued. I will not help him. Not now, not when he gets out of jail. My assistance extends to you only. She nodded. That is more than fair. We spent the next hour discussing practical solutions to her immediate problems. I could help with enough rent to prevent eviction and ensure her medications were filled. We could look into housing assistance programs and legal aid for dealing with the aftermath of Mark's financial abuse. Small, concrete steps that would stabilize her situation without creating dependency. As our meeting drew to a close, my mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. Thank you for coming today. Whatever happens next, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you have become. You did that all on your own despite my failures. For the first time in our conversation, I allowed myself to acknowledge the complex emotions her words stirred in me. Not entirely on my own. Before everything went wrong, you taught me about perseverance and hard work. Those lessons stayed with me even when you did not. She smiled sadly at that, recognizing both the compliment and the criticism embedded in my statement. As we stood to leave, she asked hesitantly, would it be possible to talk again? Maybe a phone call in a few weeks. I considered the request carefully. Let us start with email. Small steps, Mom. Small steps. She nodded, accepting these terms with visible gratitude. As I watched her walk to her car, a woman diminished by her own choices and the betrayal of the man she had chosen over her son, I felt a shifting in my heart. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a path that might eventually lead there. Over the next 6 months, my relationship with my mother evolved into something I never expected. A careful, measured reconnection built on clear boundaries and honest communication. True to my word, after our coffee shop meeting, I helped her find affordable housing through a program for seniors and low-income individuals. I ensured her prescriptions were filled regularly and connected her with a community health clinic that offered care on a sliding scale. What I did not do was give her unlimited financial support or pretend that our relationship could immediately return to what it had been before the betrayal. Instead, we established a new normal. Weekly emails evolved into occasional phone calls. Eventually, I agreed to monthly dinners at a restaurant halfway between our homes. You look well, I told her during our third such dinner. It was true. With her housing stabilized and proper medication, some of the unhealthy gray pallor had left her complexion. She had gained back a few needed pounds. "I feel better," she admitted. "Having a routine again helps. And I started volunteering at the community center 2 days a week. It gives me purpose." This was one of the aspects of our new relationship that I appreciated. My mother was not seeking to be rescued or supported indefinitely. She was actively rebuilding her own life, finding ways to contribute, even as she accepted the limited help I was willing to provide. 2 months after Brendan was released from jail, he called me directly. I had not spoken to him since the day I discovered the empty college fund nearly 4 years earlier. "Jason, man, it is Brendan," he said, when I answered his voice, overly casual, as if we were old friends. "How is it going?" "What do you want, Brendan?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Look, I know things were messed up before, but I am trying to get back on my feet now. I thought maybe you could help me out with a place to stay for a while, or a loan to get an apartment. Mom said you are doing really well." The audacity was almost impressive. "No, Brendan, I cannot help you." "Come on, man. We are family," he pressed. "No, we are not," I replied calmly. "You took my college fund and wasted it on cars and drugs. You lied about needing rehab. You are not my family." That was years ago. People change. I did my time. The entitlement in his voice confirmed that nothing had actually changed. "I wish you well, Brendan. I hope you figure things out, but it will not be with my help." I hung up and immediately called my mother to inform her of the conversation. "He called you. I am so sorry," she said, sounding genuinely distressed. "I never gave him your number." "He probably got it from your phone," I suggested. "The important thing is that we are on the same page. I cannot and will not help him." "I understand," she assured me. "I told him the same thing when he asked me about reaching out to you. He is staying with a friend right now. I made it clear that he cannot live with me." This boundary with Brendan became an unexpected point of healing between my mother and me. Her willingness to respect my position and maintain her own boundaries with her stepson demonstrated a fundamental change in her priorities. She was no longer sacrificing my well-being for his, and that shift mattered more than any apology could. As my career advanced, I received an offer for a prestigious research position at a medical institute in Boston. It would mean moving across the country, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. When I told my mother about it during one of our dinners, I watched her face carefully for signs of manipulation or guilt. Instead, she smiled genuinely. "That is wonderful, Jason. When would you start?" "September," I replied. "Sarah is applying for nursing positions in the area. We are planning to move together." "I am happy for both of you," she said, and I believed her. "We can still do our emails and calls, and maybe I could visit sometime if that would be okay." The fact that she framed it as a question, rather than an assumption, told me how far we had come. "We will see," I said, not making promises. I was not sure I wanted to keep, one step at a time. 2 weeks before my move to Boston, Sarah organized a small going-away gathering with our closest friends. To my surprise, she had invited Aunt Lena, who had become an important figure in my life. What I did not expect was that my mother would arrive with her. "I hope it is okay," Aunt Lena said quietly as they entered. "Rachel wanted to wish you well, but she said she would leave if you preferred." I looked at my mother, standing uncertainly in the doorway of Tyler's apartment with a small gift bag in her hands. 4 years ago, she had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way. 2 years ago, I would have asked her to leave. But now, after months of rebuilt boundaries and small steps toward healing, I found myself nodding. "It is fine," I told Aunt Lena. "She can stay." Later that evening, my mother handed me the gift bag. "It is not much," she said. "Just something I thought you might want to have in your new home." Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. It showed my father holding me as a baby with my mother beside him, all of us laughing at something outside the frame. "I found it when I was moving," she explained. "I thought you should have it. A reminder of where you came from before everything went wrong." The gift was perfect in its simplicity and meaning. Not expensive or grand, but thoughtful and connected to our shared history before the betrayal. I thanked her sincerely. As the evening wound down, my mother prepared to leave with Aunt Lena. At the door, she hesitated. I know I have said this before, but I am so proud of you, Jason. Not just your accomplishments, but the person you are. Your father would be proud, too. For the first time in 4 years, I initiated a hug. It was brief and slightly awkward, but it was genuine. Thank you for coming tonight, I said as we separated, and thank you for respecting the boundaries I needed. The move to Boston marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sarah and I found an apartment we loved, and both of our careers flourished. My relationship with my mother continued through regular emails and occasional phone calls. She never asked for more than I was willing to give, and slowly the sharp edges of betrayal began to dull. A year after my move, I received news that my research on cellular regeneration had been accepted for publication in a prestigious medical journal. It was a significant professional milestone, one that would help secure my eventual admission to medical school. The first person I called after Sarah was surprisingly my mother. "I always knew you would do extraordinary things," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when I failed you so badly, I never doubted your brilliance." I did not call for compliments. I told her, though her words warmed something in me. I called because, despite everything, you were the one who first taught me to love science. Those elementary school science fair projects we did together. You were the one who bought me my first microscope. Her silence told me she understood the significance of what I was saying. Before Mark, before Brendan, before the betrayal, she had been a good mother. That truth existed alongside the harm she had caused. Both realities were valid. Looking back on the 4-year journey since discovering my empty college fund, I realized that the betrayal, painful as it was, taught me invaluable lessons about self-reliance, resilience, and the true meaning of family. I learned that family is not defined by blood or legal ties, but by actions, respect, and mutual support. I discovered strength I never knew I possessed and built a life that was truly my own. The relationship with my mother will never be what it once was. Trust once shattered never quite reassembles in the same pattern, but we have found a new way to connect, one built on honesty, clear boundaries, and the acknowledgement of both past harm and present growth. As for forgiveness, I have come to understand that it is not a single moment of dramatic absolution, but a gradual process of releasing anger and making space for new possibilities. I may never fully forgive the betrayal, but I have chosen not to be defined by it. In that choice lies a different kind of freedom. The most profound lesson from this journey is that sometimes walking away is not an act of cruelty, but of necessary self-preservation. Setting boundaries is not selfish, but essential. And rebuilding relationships after betrayal requires not blind trust, but clear-eyed awareness of both the past and the present. What is your experience with family betrayal? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect yourself? Drop a comment below sharing your story. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family challenges. And if you know someone who might need to hear that it is okay to set boundaries with family, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the family that truly matters is often the one we choose, not just the one we are born into.